More than 7 years after Abby Williams and Libby German were killed, the trial for the man accused of murdering them enters its third day. Thanks for joining us here on WTHR Plus. This is your Delphi Debrief. We're going to hear from our legal analyst, Katie Jackson Lindsay, in a moment. But first, we want to take you to Delphi, where our senior investigative reporter, Bob Siegel, spent today in court where jurors were shown graphic images of the crime scene. Bob?
Hey, Scott. I had a chance to be in the courtroom today along with Emily Longnecker. We both were able to sit in the first row to watch today's deliberations. And, you know, Emily, we knew that the families were going to have this day come. We knew that the jury was at some point during this trial going to see these really graphic crime scene photos at the scene. That day was today.
Yeah.
It was hard for the families. It was hard for the jury.
Yes.
It was hard for the reporters. It was hard for everyone in there today.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, I was in the afternoon session, and as they were talking about evidence collection, they walked the jurors through evidence collection using those crime scene photos and how they processed both of the girls' bodies there at the scene. And at one point, the juror that is in the front row, a gentleman closest to the public seats, closest to our seats, he sat there like this.
Yeah.
And like this, and at a couple times closed his eyes, and you could see people still uncomfortable in the jury with those photos, which
Yeah.
I know that they saw this morning when you were there, but still, I think it's still difficult every time you see them.
Oh, absolutely. So it was graphic testimony today, very difficult testimony today. Let's get you started by understanding exactly who took the witness stand today. So the first, or I should say, the folks who took the stand, who spent most of the day talking to the jury, it was Jason Page, Dwayne Dotsman, and Brian Olahai, I believe is how you pronounce his name. They are Indiana State Police crime scene investigators, and the three of them worked together to process the Delphi murder scene back in 2017. And there was one other person who testified today, that's Darren Giancola. He's a detective with the Carroll County Sheriff's Department. He was the first law enforcement officer to actually see Abby and Libby's bodies. So they walked jurors through what they saw on the day the girls were discovered murdered, and they showed really these gut-wrenching pictures that they took that day, showing not only where the girls were found, but also their injuries, right?
Very close-up photos of their injuries.
So the jurors got to see 117 crime scene photos that the three crime scene investigators took back in February of 2017. And again, we want to warn you right now, what you're about to hear, even hearing us describe what we saw in court today, it's disturbing. The pictures show Abby and Libby lying in the woods with their throats slit. Right. Libby's body was naked. Her face and her hands were covered in blood. Abby was found in jeans and a sweatshirt, blood on her neck, deep wound you could see on her neck. Investigators testified that an area of the ground near the girls was saturated in blood, and jurors got to see a picture of that. They also saw a picture of blood on a nearby tree.
Right.
These are the types of images, Emily, that once you see them, you can never unsee pictures like that.
Never unsee them. And of course, they're up there on a big screen for the jury to see. It's a large screen. It's right there in all of its really gruesome detail. And we walked through some of those this afternoon with CSI investigator for Indiana State Police, Brian Olahai, that took us through those photos, first starting with photos of the items they found in the creek, and what was found there, what was collected, how it was collected, and then moving to the crime scene. And that's where the crime scene photos came up.
Right. And that crime, the video monitor, it's on the far side of the courtroom from jurors, but it's so large that, again, some of these pictures almost seem larger than life.
Yes.
That they took. Some of the pictures were taken from the air, some from on the ground, and the witnesses, they had this special pointer where they could go up and point things out, and the evidence that was in these pictures to the jurors.
And also the same seen different angles, so all kinds of different angles, all like a 360, if you will, of all different angles of the girls' bodies.
Yeah, and we're talking again, 117 photos of the crime scene is what the jurors saw today. And some of those, I'd say about half of them, extremely graphic, showing the girls' bodies.
Yeah.
And those were really hard to look at. And as you mentioned earlier, some of the jurors were, they seemed shaken seeing these pictures.
Absolutely shaken. Even, I mean, this was the first time for me seeing them this afternoon. I know you saw them this morning, so it's difficult. I don't know any other way to describe it. It's gut-wrenching is very appropriate.
Yeah, and so one of the jurors, who we know from jury selection, he works around kids. He works at a school district. There were times that he just put his face down in his hands. There were other times where he just leaned back.
Yeah.
And he put his hands on top of his head. I saw
Yeah.
another juror. As she was looking at the picture, she just over and over again, just taking long, deep breaths, trying to relax herself and just take in these pictures. It was very emotional for members of the jury.
I was also noting what Richard Allen was doing while some of these photos were up on the screen. Sometimes he was looking, and sometimes he had his head down and he was taking notes in his book or his paper. So sometimes looking at them, reading glasses on top of his head, and sometimes taking notes. So
let's talk about the families, because again, of all the people in the courtroom today, the most emotion that we saw was from the family, as you would well expect. This almost 8-year nightmare that they have been experiencing since 2017. The families, they got a chance to see the pictures that the jury saw. They got a chance to see them on Saturday afternoon, and we were here at the courthouse when the families came out, and they were very, very upset, some of them wiping away tears. They got a chance to see these photos on Saturday. I spoke to one of the family members today. He said that was a chance for them to be able to digest these pictures before they were going to be in court today. So it was I think a good thing for them, but obviously incredibly difficult. Today they were still in tears in the courtroom, and both Abby and Libby's moms were there at times. I saw them crying. I saw them looking away. They didn't want to look at the screen during some of the most graphic evidence that was put up on the screen for jurors to see.
I mean, I would describe this afternoon from what I could see. I was able to see the reaction of Mike and Becky Patty, Libby's grandparents who raised her. They were pretty stoic this afternoon, I would say. I think, as you said, they've had time to process this since Saturday, process the horror of what they've seen. So I would describe them as stoic by this afternoon.
So the purpose, I think, for the state of showing all these pictures was not just to allow the jury to see the injuries to the girls and where they were in the woods, but it really was also for the jury to understand how the investigators collected the evidence.
Right.
Talk about that a little bit, and to help explain for our viewers the term ground zero that we heard a lot about today.
Right, and we heard that a lot from CSI investigator Brian Olahai, and he said when he got the call to go to this crime scene to basically lead the investigation, he said, I knew this was going to be more than just a simple crime scene. So he went into it knowing that this involved 2 young girls, and they believed at this point that it was a homicide, a lot of trauma. He described the area about 20 feet around the girls' bodies as ground zero, and then even 15 feet beyond that as an area that very few people got in. I think he testified maybe 4 people, including himself, were in that area before the bodies were transported away.
And the investigators talked about the fact that the vast majority, in fact, all of the important evidence that they collected from the crime scene was in that immediate area right around Abby and Libby where their bodies were found, in that ground zero area.
Right.
And they really talked to the jury, and the questions from Jim Luttrell, who was asking questions on behalf of the state
Right.
of these investigators. It seemed really designed to try to give the jury confidence in how the evidence was collected.
Right. Olahai described the scene as that there were limbs and branches placed on the girls' bodies, and he talked about how they meticulously removed the sticks first, and that they first concentrated on Libby's body, first processing that scene before they moved on to Abigail. Investigator Olahai talked about first testing Libby's hands. Her hands, as you saw in the pictures, her hands were pretty bloody, and he talked about, processing her hands for any kind of DNA. And I thought it was interesting. He said that he himself swabbed the areas of her hands. First, when they were looking at her hands, they were looking at defensive wounds to see if there were any defensive wounds. Had she fought back against her attacker? And then when he swabbed her hands for DNA, he said that when you swabs an area that might have a lot of blood in one area and less in another on her hands, he wanted to swab the area that was less bloody, because to swab an area that had a lot of her blood, I think this was a quote, it would scream of the individual who deposited the blood. The suspect's DNA would be muted out. Yeah. So that is why they focused more on her wrist area where there was less blood, and he described putting each swab in an envelope.
And Scott, we want to point out that there was a question that was asked directly of one of the investigators to say, did you recover any evidence from the crime scene that reflected DNA from Richard Allen found at the crime scene? And in an important moment during this trial, the investigator responded no. So we can report from today that, again, investigators say they do not have any DNA at the crime scene. Scott?
Bob and Emily, I wonder, is the defense team pushing back? In other words, are they asking hard questions of any of these witnesses or challenging them on the witness stand?
Yeah.
We did hear that today, particularly in two main areas. Do you want to talk about the sticks as one of the areas, the sticks that were found out there?
The sticks is one of theirs. I mean, they didn't get a chance, the defense, to cross-examine yet Investigator Olahai yet, because when court let out today and the jury was sent home, the state still had Investigator Olahai on the stand. So the cross of him and all of his descriptions have not even been dealt with yet. But when I got in there this afternoon, that's when the cross-examination was starting of Dwayne Dotsman, and you heard his testimony this morning. So he was told, he testified that he was told to go back and collect the sticks later, 2 days later, after they were removed from the bodies. And defense attorney Andrew Baldwin asked him, well, so someone would have had to handle those sticks to put them on those bodies, right? And he said yes. And Andrew Baldwin said, well, so that would leave maybe hand cells, maybe DNA. And Dotsman said, well, not if they're wearing gloves. And attorney Baldwin said, well, were they wearing gloves? And Dotsman responded, I have no idea. So, but, testifying that he collected those sticks a couple days later, and basically, when asked, well, why didn't you collect all of them, or did you leave some there? And he said, this is a quote, we can't go picking up every stick and leave in the forest just because it has blood on it.
Right. And there was discussion and testimony given to the jury in what appeared to be a preemptive line of questioning by Jim Luttrell and the state to the investigators, asking them, by the way, this was even before the defense brought it up, the defense said, by the way, did you enter the sticks that were on the girls' bodies as evidence? Did you collect them? Right. And he said, no, we didn't. And he said, why not? And the investigator, Dotsman, reported to the jury, he said, well, we discussed it, and we had never before ever been able to get any DNA off of a stick. So we decided there was no evidentiary value in collecting those, so we put them aside and we left them there. And then, like you said, then they decided later to go back and get them. So that's one of the areas, Scott, that there was some pushback. The other big area that the defense really pushed back on was a bullet cartridge.
Yeah.
Jurors saw some photographs of a bullet cartridge, an unfired bullet that was at the crime scene near Libby's body. They described, as they were looking at the crime scene and going over it very closely, one of the investigators kept seeing this little glitter, a shine of light among the leaves. And so he explained how he carefully pushed away some of the leaves in that area, and that
Right.
revealed this bullet casing.
Yes, this cartridge.
And the defense, again, they really pushed back against that. They asked questions of the investigator saying, well, how did you handle that bullet? Why were there no additional pictures and video of you collecting that bullet and
Right.
moving that bullet? They seem to be raising questions about the possibility that there was a lapse in the chain of custody that would maintain the integrity of that evidence.
Right, they questioned Investigator Dotsman on, well, did you take video of this bullet being collected? And he said, well, no, that's, nothing that we would ever do before. So, Investigator Olahai, when he got on the stand, he talked about he was the one that collected that bullet himself, placed it in the bag, and put it into his car at the end of the day, and it went to a temporary storage area in West Lafayette for one night, a locked storage area, which, very few people have access to, and the next day it was taken to the lab to eventually be tested.
And again, that unfired bullet casing, that is the one piece of physical evidence. The state tested that.
Right.
And they determined in testing that that unfired bullet casing, markings on that, when it was tested at some state labs, they linked that back to a gun that was recovered from Richard Allen's home that they say is, that is the main evidence that the state has placing Richard Allen really in ground zero at the crime scene.
Right, but when we read through all of these court documents, you can kind of see the roadmap that the defense is going to have in attacking how the testing of that bullet goes, the
Yep.
science behind it. Is it legitimate? Some people, what's been said is, prosecution loves this kind of testing. Defense experts don't like this kind of testing.
Exactly.
But Olahai also testified this was the only cartridge collected at the scene. No other cartridges were found, and the cartridge was individually packaged by itself, by me, taken by me to West Lafayette, and placed in that temporary storage locker where there is limited access. He stressed that over and over. And I've noticed that each person, when the defense cross-examines them, asks about, so were you carrying a gun? And what
Yes.
kind of ammunition does your gun have?
Exactly.
Trying to, suggest, could this cartridge belong to one of them or someone else? That seems to be a line of questioning.
Right, because in opening arguments, we heard the defense raise the possibility in the minds of the jury that maybe this, what they refer to at this point almost sarcastically as
The
a
magic
magic bullet
Right.
at the scene, raising the possibility that perhaps that did not come from Richard Allen. Maybe it was a police officer at the scene who had one of these bullets or bullet casings drop onto the ground. And so there's been questioning of every one of these police officers to find out what type of ammunition they carried. All of them, we should point out so far, have said it's not a 40 caliber type ammunition that they
they've had.
carry.
That's
so
correct.
that takes that off the table at least for now.
Right.
You can see behind us, it is dark. The courthouse is behind us. Things have ended for the day. Back here tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. And certainly, we have not heard the last about the bullet casing. That will become a central feature of this trial as we move along. So for now, Scott, we're going to go ahead and send it back to you. We will be back in the courthouse tomorrow morning for day 4. So for Emily, I'm Bob Siegel. Scott, back to you.
All right, guys, thanks so much for your great perspective and giving our viewers a really good look, because you've both been inside listening to the trial, and we sure appreciate the summary on this show. Thanks so much. So our legal expert, attorney Katie Jackson Lindsay, joins us in studio. We're going to get through a lot of what we just heard Bob and Emily talk about. So the jury hears all this evidence today. Bob and Emily both saying how difficult it was for everybody to listen to, the families and of course the jury. They mentioned that Richard Allen was in court seeing these images, but according to Bob and Emily, didn't appear to have a strong reaction, taking notes at some point. Would this be the first time that the suspect in this case would see these graphic pictures?
We should assume that it's not the first time that he's seen these pictures. As a defense attorney, you have an obligation to share with your client all of the evidence that will be presented against him. And so this should not have been the first time he's seen these pictures. His attorneys would have reviewed them with him before, which takes away a little bit of the reaction to them.
Okay, so if the jury is watching Richard Allen and seeing that he doesn't really have much of a reaction other than taking some notes at a time, do they draw any conclusions based on either his reaction or a non-reaction, if you will?
Well, that's the difficult part. That's the difficult part about having a client sitting there that's always on display in a jury trial. And to some extent, as a defense attorney, you tell your client not to react. And so that can make the client appear very stoic. It can make the client appear insensitive. But really, there's no winning in terms of trying to gauge his reaction.
So there was a lot made today in court about this so-called magic bullet, based on whether or not this casing was connected to Richard Allen's gun. That seems to be what the state is saying. What do you make about this, introducing this magic bullet into this case?
Well, what we know from the probable cause affidavit from the outset is that is the piece of evidence that links Richard Allen to this case. We're not going to hear someone identify him as seeing him as the person who did this. These victims are not able to speak for themselves and point out the person who did this to them. And so that is the piece of evidence. And so it's great that we're seeing very early on how the state plans to deal with it and how the defense plans to attack it. And I think we should expect throughout the duration of this trial that they will continue to aggressively attack that piece of evidence. In
terms of the chain of custody, how that bullet casing was handled after being recovered at ground zero?
Absolutely, because I think we know from some of the pre-trial pleadings that we're not exactly sure how it was originally found, if it was extracted from being in the ground, and who handled it thereafter. And those things are really, really important. They're important for contamination. They're important for damage to that bullet, because presumably that bullet could have been out there for a very long time and could have nothing to do with this case at all. And so I think what the defense is doing is appropriate, and it's important to challenge that single piece of evidence in every way that they can, because that's the only thing that got their client in that seat.
One of the other things that we've heard in their summary after day 3, the sticks that were found on the girls' bodies. What do you make of the idea that these sticks were found on the girls' bodies, weren't immediately taken away for evidence, because they said that in the past they haven't been able to recover DNA from sticks? What do you make of the fact that these appeared to be, according to at least the state, that these may have been, that they were there on these bodies?
I think that should have been a pretty shocking revelation for that jury today for a number of reasons. First, DNA is not the only evidence that can be gathered from an item at a crime scene. There could be hair, there could be other fibers related to clothing of the potential perpetrator. And so I think that was a really reckless way of leaving that there, a really reckless way of handling the evidence. Additionally, I think that now we're going to see, we've been introduced to that theme of mishandling evidence, and now we're going to see that weave throughout the trial, because what we learned was that they initially thought that it didn't have any evidentiary value, but then they went back and ended up collecting those sticks. And so that's troubling, and I think it's going to give the jury some concerns and some pause about how the evidence was handled in this case.
Okay, so if you've been following this story over the first 3 days of the case, and perhaps you were with us on the weekend, you heard Bob talk about the fact that the jury was actually asking questions of the witnesses. I think that, you and I have heard different trials where they ask maybe the judge while they're deliberating the case, maybe asking a question there. Is this normal to see a jury actually ask questions of the witnesses during the trial?
Yes, this is normal. This is allowed in the state of Indiana. Our trial rules allow this. And in fact, during jury instructions, the Judge Gull, would have informed this jury that they are able to ask questions of the witnesses at the conclusion of both their direct and cross-examination. So it is normal, and it's a very powerful tool, as you can imagine, because it allows the parties to see or to be able to gauge what the jury's thinking about and what questions they have.
All right, let's talk about the hair in Abby's hand. What do you make of that revelation?
Well, we heard about it first in the defense's opening statement, and the defense did a good job of crafting it in a way to let the jury know that this investigation is still ongoing, even at the point where they're bringing this case to you as the jury. And so I think what they're doing is highlighting, one, that this is still a piece of evidence that was at that scene on that day 7 years ago that we still don't have a determination about. So that in the event that the state comes back and now has a conclusion about that hair evidence, the defense can say again, here's another example of them not doing their job 7 years ago when they should have done it. They're still working on that case even after it's before your consideration. And so I think it's powerful, regardless of the outcome of what happens with the DNA analysis on that case. It's a way for the defense to show that the evidence in this case was never handled properly, and it's still not being handled properly.
One of the other things that's come out has been this audio that we have heard, for many, many years. Of course, this case happened 7 years ago. We've all heard the down the hill audio, the guy on the bridge saying that because one of the girls was recording that on their phone. So you heard down the hill, and the way Indiana State Police first gave it to the media and out to the public was to put it on a loop. So you'd hear down the hill, down the hill, down the hill. Tell us about the significance of that audio that we're hearing in the trial, whether or not we'll hear any more of it, and what other voices may be on it as well.
Right, so we learned today that the defense filed another motion in limine. So another motion where they're asking the court to limit what the state can do with this piece of evidence. And in that motion, they relayed that they anticipated that the state would put it on a loop again, as we heard it. But there was also this revelation for the first time that the victim's voice or voices could be heard on this audio as well. And so they anticipate that the state will call witnesses who will opine about what is being said by the victims. And they don't want that to happen. And it shouldn't happen, because the jury should be able to draw their own conclusions about the facts and about what they hear. And so they are asking that the state be prohibited from putting on witnesses to say, we can hear the victims on this audio, and this is what they're saying. And so we now know that that evidence is coming. We shouldn't expect that it wasn't, but we now know that there are even going to be some challenges about that particular evidence.
Of course, that video of the bridge guy, as we have been calling him for 7 years, we only got a snippet of this. Mm-hmm. Do you think that the state introduces more of that video, if there is any more video? Would that be something that we would likely hear in this case?
Well, it will be interesting at this point to see if they introduce it at all, because what we know now is that they aren't going to introduce the sketch evidence, and presumably that first sketch that the entire world reviewed for several years was the guy on the bridge, or at least that's what we were told. And so now that they ask not to be able to mention the sketch evidence, it'll be interesting to see how they reconcile that with the video of the guy on the bridge.
So based on what we heard today, coming out of day 3, what do you think the state ends up moving into tomorrow? Based on some of the witnesses that we've heard today and the fact that we've heard these and seen this graphic testimony, what do you think that we're likely to see on Tuesday?
I suspect in the coming days that we will hear from the witnesses that were simply out on the trail enjoying the day. So on the first day, we heard from the family, we heard from people who were involved in the search. Now we're getting a little more into the experts that collected the evidence from the scene, and we're getting to see the scene itself. And so I would suspect we should be moving into those civilian witnesses who are not law enforcement, who are not experts, who are not family, but simply saw people on the trail. The witness testimony that we're anticipating about the guy that was bloody and muddy, I suspect that will be coming in the coming days.
All right, Katie Jackson. Lindsay, our legal analyst, thanks again for joining us and help us sort through day 3 of this Delphi Murders Trial. We're going to be breaking down this trial every weeknight at 10 p.m. right here on WTHR+. You can also find our ongoing coverage, including detailed reports on each day of this trial, Just go to WTHR.com/Delphi. Thanks for joining us.